So, welcome back to the podcast this week. And it's an absolute privilege and honor for me to have a wonderful gentleman in front of me, a guy I've known very well, plays very good golf, but also a fantastic businessman. And we're going to talk a lot about business and sales. And I'm going to say, I think he's too modest about it. I think it's the sales deal that saved the country, but we'll come to that in a bit. So, Tom Baldock, welcome to Director of Synertec podcast.
Pleasure to be on. It's first time doing something like this. Always a pleasure to do it with you, James.
Exactly what you didn't know. So you're the MD of Synertec. Talk to me a little bit about who Synertec are and how you've been doing that role.
So Synertec are a document management consultancy, I guess is the easiest way to describe who we are. We basically specialize in donating, listening to customers' issues and then building a bespoke solution that meets their requirements, either the requirements of the people sending it or the people who are receiving communication. So I guess some examples would be we work with a lot of NHS trusts doing their appointment communication, but also results letters. And we go and build a channel communication that is either print and mail, upload to portals that are available in that market, all sorts of different things. So and we don't really mind how that communication gets to people as long as it's as effective as it can be. And we provide consultancy through that process for any customer that uses us.
And it's funny because when I first started working with you guys, I always described Synertec as a bit like a diamond in the rough. It's like you look at this sort of big rock, you think, where's this stuff there? Because you guys were never the most vocal about who you are, really. You did a lot of this stuff you did in the background, and even though you're a massive organization, it was like no, it's not about us, it's about the customer.
We've never, I guess, maybe the last 3 years we sort of changed that, but historically we've always been very, very quiet about who we are and what we do. A lot back in history, that would be because the intellectual property we got we'd have been worried about somebody copying it or something along those lines. And the strategy sort of changed when we realized sort of 20 odd years in that the technology got complicated enough and efficient enough that actually somebody wanted to come and compete with us, then we were in a much better place to defend ourselves in that market than we ever had been before. Which then allowed us to be a bit more expansive about talking about who we are and what we do. We have always hidden sort of behind anything and sort of being a small Southwest family business, I guess, is the.
Well, you say small, but you're not small because for those for those listening, the business is a significant sized business that employs a lot of people, right, and has significant revenues. So,
I guess we employ somewhere between 290 300 people across the country and 4 sites and turn over a decent chunk of money. So it's I think it's probably a certain element. It's I call it a small business because when I joined it was, but it's that was a long time ago now, sadly, and it's the business has grown quite considerably since I joined in 2012.
But we'll talk about that in a minute because obviously there's some background stuff. But what were you doing as an 18-year-old? What was 18-year-old Tom Baldock like? Were you always interested in business, or were you a bit sort of like entered in what was?
I hope none of my friends watch this because they'll laugh at this because in reality, I was at 18. I was at university studying geography and specifically wanted to do flood risk management. Unfortunately, I think sort of coming towards the back end of that sort of. I thought, to be fair, I'd have probably just gone to university when I turned 18, maybe, or just before that. But I've always been interested in work, basically. And so I would have been, even pre-university, I worked 2 jobs just to earn money and that sort of stuff. So I went to university and came away with no debt because of the fact that I built up enough money from it. I spent a lot of money on pool and beer during the process.
As much as you
but I guess earning money in all way, that sort of stuff. So I started my own car cleaning business at 13 or 14.
See, I never knew that. Okay.
Yeah, cleaning cars out of the back of my parents' house. It was a perfect business model because they bought all the equipment and I earned the money. So it was like 0 cost, maximum revenue. I guess I've always been interested in earning money and basically just doing a good job because I did that well for a gamekeeper and basically just then in the pub. So quite often I'd get up at 4, go and work for the gamekeeper, feed pheasants in the morning, come back, clean some cars over pub lunchtime, and then work in the pub in the evening, waiting on tables through a day when I was young. So and that's what went all the way up until when I left to go to university.
It's funny actually, isn't it? Because I always say I started working when I was 11, and I'm a bit older than you, so to fair, but that ethic of being able to work hard is such that, were your parents really be encouraging you to do that when you were younger?
I don't actually ever remember them really encouraging it, but my dad was always sort of career driven, and had various different jobs at different companies when I was younger, and had succeeded greatly in terms of what he'd done. I guess to a certain extent that rubs off on you when you see somebody else succeeding. You go, oh, actually, maybe I can do a bit of that as well. So yeah, I don't remember them ever pushing me to go and do work and that sort of stuff. I guess the bit that's always driven me is I've always liked to learn.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you go to work and you do that, you've got an opportunity to learn and do different things.
Yes.
I've also been really fortunate. I think a lot of the people I've worked for when I was younger were particularly good at teaching me that actually it's not worth doing. I know it's now sort of cliche, and if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Yeah. But in reality, that was bred into me from a really young age, in terms of specifically the gamekeeper taught me both the meaning of hard labor, and also the actually, no, it's worth doing it well.
Jen, sorry, can I just jump in? Can I just check one thing on this one for 1 second while you're 2 seconds, just want to make sure my seconds are which are good. Yeah, that's fine. Okay,
cool.
Crack on, guys.
So if you think back to those times when you were working, were there any particular, you mentioned the gamekeeper, were there any particular, just, as I digress, were there any particular role models or people when you were in those early stages of your career before you got, to become an MD, that you would, you'd say were real inspirations or people you looked up to, or like you say, they gave you something that made you think, yeah, that's really good knowledge to have?
I guess, I was like, before Synertec, there was all sorts of different people in terms of different things where I just learned different areas, and they got different experiences to give me as part of that process. Like, and Medegi all the way through to the family that run the village pub that I work for. They've been there and done different things over time, and actually learning off those guys. Once I started Synertec, I think I was really fortunate that actually the group of directors that were there when I joined had a really wide breadth of experience across the sort of, I guess, the four major ones that I dealt with mainly at that point. In terms of, like, one was previously in the Marines, one worked as a effectively electrician for SWEB, doing the white goods piece, sort of repair business as part of that. And then my father was one of the directors at the time, and he'd worked for a company called Checkpoint, who sold check signing machines. So you've got a really, and then there was the sort of standard technical sort of genius, I guess, and that's a phrase that's probably overused these days. That gave me a load of sort of experience. So I had 4 really good roles when I joined Synertec that I could learn up from my whole career. I think up until my role sort of changed into being managing director, actually, they would probably be the only people I really lent on in that process. There was a lot for me to learn from those, and I really learned off those. And then since I've been in my managing director role, I've gone out and found role models and mentors from other businesses and other areas. But again, it comes back to that. I just like to be able to learn. Yeah. So it doesn't matter to me. I'm not one of those business people that sort of has to be shown to be the best at something or anything like that. For me, actually, I'd just rather be learning off other people and seeing how much I can pick up and improve myself in that process.
But that's also why you're successful, because you've got that mindset to be able to just carry on doing things. Like you say, we all learn in those ways. I mean, just so background. So obviously, we'll talk about Synertec in a moment, but Synertec had been going for quite some time then before you joined in 2012.
Yeah.
What was that first day? Can you remember your first day in the business, and what was it like?
Well, it depends. You mean my first official day or my first?
Yeah, well, obviously, when you started working in the business, you probably were involved before, but can you remember that? And how did it come about for you, actually? Because what were you, I mean, go back to it, what were you doing in between the university and sort of joining Synertec? And at what point did you think, actually, I just need to go work for this business?
I'll take it. I mean, this is a this is the complete truth, and probably not the answer that necessarily helps in any way, shape or form. So I had absolutely zero intention of ever working for Synertec. And like that was a well-known fact across the family and that sort of stuff. But as any good student, you need some money as part of your process. So I was there doing work experience and had done work experience over a number of years for them. And during between my second and third year of university, I'd done some work in the summer, and the production director at the time offered me a job. Weirdly, under the proviso that I had to get a 2-1 at university. I can't imagine where that...
Did you get one?
I did manage to get a 2-1, but I can't imagine where that particular stipulation came from. I imagine that was something to do with my father saying, no, because if he stops working, I'll kill you somewhere along the line. I would imagine it was. So I got offered the job, and to be honest, I took a financial decision at the time. Was obviously this 2011, we were still sort of right at the end of the financial crisis at the time, and I was very realistic that jobs in flood risk management were not particularly well funded at the time. So I accepted the job offer, fully expecting to start for Synertec in 2012 and work for a couple of years, and then actually time to move off and go and do what I was doing, what I wanted.
Like manager?
Yeah, basically go and what I do, but what I wanted to. So when you say in between university and the part of that agreement was that actually I finished university on the 24th of May, 2012. And I started for Synertec on the 28th of May.
Oh, really? 4 days.
So 4 days was my gap between finishing university and starting full-time employment. In hindsight, it would have been nice to have a bit more of a gap in that process, but it's a long time ago now.
Can you remember that first official date, the 28th of May? Can you remember it, or was it a bit of a blur?
I think...
What's the actual role you came in to do then?
So I was the distributed printed project manager. So I was working directly for the production director, basically running specialist projects across the production environment, as we'd say. One of my first jobs was to move one of our production sites. So comically, the Warrington production site we still have now, it was my job to open that site. It was one of my first jobs I did when I first joined the company. The first thing is, it doesn't really stand out. I guess that's because I'd done work experience in a very similar role. Yeah. I remember having to go through all the company induction training and sitting there thinking, I'm not sure I really need to be in here, but it was one of those tick box exercises that you had to get done, and reading the ISMS policy, or information security management system policy, and that sort of stuff, which I think you might have had to read at one point, but just it's a long read.
Yeah. But it's right for the right reason.
It's for the right reason, but it's a long read. So yeah, I don't remember specifically what that first day felt like. I think I would have been still really nervous. I think I was still, but I wasn't particularly confident at that age.
But because your dad was a director of the business, and I guess people might say, oh, it might have been easy for him. My experience of those sort of situations is harder. Is that the people are a bit tougher on you because and because they, especially certain business directors that I know at that stage that are like, no, he's not going to get an easy ride. Was it? I mean, how was? Can you remember conversations with your dad about things like that?
There's sort of two bits that really stand out from working with your father or for your father in that situation. Ultimately, one was he was incredibly hard on me to achieve things. Yeah. To the extent that I lived at home for the first 3 months when I started working after I left university. And it was a 45-minute drive in the car. So being a student, I just finished being a student, I got lifted with him every day, which meant leaving at 5 or something ridiculous, I'm sure. But basically on the way in, I'd get 45 minutes of being quizzed about what I was going to do that day. And then on the way home, I'd get 45 minutes quizzed about what I'd achieved in that day.
Yeah.
And basically that was just every single day for the first 3 months until I eventually found a house to buy and move out, which was obviously apparent stations at that point. I was thinking, geez, I'm not sure I'm going to cope if this carries on for 10 years. But I think that was sort of piece was, he was really hard on me and learning and pushed me really, really hard in the early days to succeed and to prove my worth, if you liked. And I guess the other bit was the other way to look at it. I've always been pretty self-reflective, but actually I knew people would think it was, I'd got a job because of my dad.
Yeah.
And what I wanted, I spent a lot of time in my early career proving that actually I wasn't there for my dad because of my dad.
Yeah.
And I wasn't succeeding because of the family connection. I think now I look back, I probably just wasted effort in that. I should have been concentrating on something more important than that. But But yeah, in reality, that was how that felt and looked at the time.
And in terms of back then, Synertec, obviously you got 300 odd people now. How many people were employed at Synertec at the time? Do you remember?
When I joined, probably 120 maybe. Yeah.
So it was an established company, but it wasn't the size of scale that it was now.
No, yeah, we would be, probably 12% of the size we are at the moment, something like that. So much smaller, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So obviously, you've got into the business and you started working, and obviously, at what point, 2012 we started, but then there came a point where you became MD in the business, which was from, and I believe maybe you want to share a bit more about that overall process. Again, you had to invest quite significantly to make that happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, sort of through the whole period, it was 2012, started as project manager in the production environment. By, I guess, 2014, I was probably a project manager for the whole business. So running specific projects, and then went through that, picking up facilities, then production control, then data management, and then ultimately ended up as head of operations in probably 2017, 2018. And then in 2019, the owners of the business, or the directors at the time, decided that they wanted some of their cash off the table. And they took part in, they went through a process called vendor initiated management buyout. So they basically went to the management team and said, we'd like you to buy this. And I bought in at that point. It was October 2019, I think.
And how did that feel to actually be, to put your own cash on the table at that point, and to must be quite a big, scary moment, nervy bit, or were you quite comfortable and confident about where you were going with it?
No, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I guess I'd have been 29. Yeah, 29 at the time. So I was still relatively young to be investing in a business.
Yeah.
Really, what was a reasonable size chunk of cash? I mean, nothing compared to the value of the business ultimately, because the way it works is you put a subscription price on it and then the business pays loan notes back to the owners. So it was a big amount of money, but not huge.
There's still a commitment that you there, right?
That sort of stuff. And I think it just felt like the right thing to do. I don't think, if I'd have known what had happened since, I think I'd probably be more nervous than I was at the time. Because obviously, if you look at the time, October 2019, and then the sort of pandemic started in March 2020. So it was going to come to that. Yeah, it wasn't long after that sort of process where it was a slightly terrifying experience as a new director of a business of actually what do we do here? But yeah, I think the business was growing and it was always growing. We've always experienced probably double-figure growth and sort of 10 to 13% sort of pretty easily. I guess it sounds stupid, like you mentioned not marketing, particularly not talking about who we are, but that's partially because we've always been really successful in that process. So,
well, I guess it intrigued me because obviously you've been in that role for sort of in the business for 5-6 years, but you've always been particularly, I know from talking to you, engaging with you, you've always been particularly intrigued by winning business and doing it. Was that, even though you were in a production side, and people think, oh, that's not your role, you still made it your objective and your role to go and help the business win business, right?
Yeah, I mean, my brother was a really successful salesman. He's a really successful salesperson in his own right. And I think to a certain extent, there was that element of I enjoyed learning off him and I started that process as well. But yeah, I think even when I was just a project manager for production, we used to, we still do, tours for customers to come and do production site visits so they can look at what we're doing and get a picture of it. And it's just, it's both a bit of a jolly and a great way to show the scale of the business. And I volunteered to do those tours. So I did them for probably 5 or 6 years. And that was because I enjoyed engaging with customers in that process. And I think it comes from a real pride in terms of what the business is capable. I think that's where the drive to win your business comes from, is I want people to understand how valuable Synertec is in terms of how much benefit we can provide to them. So yeah, I think I've always wanted to learn and try and win in business as much as I can through engaging with customers and doing all sorts of other pieces.
One of the things I'll put in a link in the podcast actually to the video tour of the Synertec facilities, because one of the things that Tom's been very humble about this, it's quite an incredible, when you see it, and obviously the company is very secure around what you can see it, but there is a video that shows this on. And So to give an example of scale, and you're going to tell me I've got the numbers wrong, but I should know this from what I did recently. It's 900,000 ish per day letters that go out from Synertec facilities, around that figure.
900. Well, it's fair to say
not in there was a time, but it was a lot more.
But that we can do about 1 million a day. We generally average, depending on what's going on, across both meetings, about 650, 700,000 pieces of communication a day.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, and again, I'll put the link to the video, because when you see this size of scale of, organizations that are just sending out thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of letters, but also making sure that each one goes to the right person and, done in the right way. It's an incredible operation when you see it. And
that's the key to us, and one of the things that I guess we really focus on slightly differently. It's not about bulk and really throwing it out the door. It's the every communication matters. I mean, obviously, the company vision has recently changed to include that as a phrase, and I think that sort of rolls through the whole culture of the business in terms of every communication does matter to pretty much everybody in the business, and they're all important for a reason. I think that's really driven home by we do cancer results letters for people and all sorts of stuff like that. Is if you can't spend the time getting that right, then you probably shouldn't be doing what we do for a business.
But it's something we talked about, and I sort of helped a little bit with that in the early days, because that element of every single letter, whilst it looks like 900,000, just the numbers, like I say, that letter is either a test result for something, or an appointment to go and see the doctor, which they'd be wanting, or it's a communication to a client to tell them there's a new product going available. It's that communicates myriad of different communications, and each one, like you say, matters to that individual.
They've got everything we do has got an inherent security value. It's the sort of way to summarize it, I guess, is whether it's a payment company sending an invoice to a customer that they don't want, and payment company of a different customer to see, so whether it's a benefits letter from accounts. They're all different types of communication we do. And they're all equally important to the people who are sending it or the people who are receiving it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you have to sort of keep in mind in terms of what we do is valuable to somebody somewhere every time we send a piece of communication.
And you mentioned actually about the tour, and I think it's a really interesting, I talk about it as a validation event in a sales environment, whereby when people are going, oh, do I want to work with this company? And then you get them to say, hey, come and see us. And I've, again, some of the stuff that we did, when I worked with you guys last year, I saw a couple of tours, and you can see people's jaws drop as they go. I mean, they must be quite good. We're going to move on to the business side of it, but they must be quite fun to do, because people it's a bit like the TARDIS. You don't really realize what's there, and you go in and go, wow.
It was a great learning curve for me in terms of the questions people ask. I think give you a real hint in terms of what they're interested in from a sales perspective. And I think that's that early days of doing those production tours really built my knowledge of what people were really interested in, and therefore what the value was. And you're right, it's a nice thing to see. It really drives home the desire and passion for a business when somebody comes in and they go, oh, wow, look at that sort of thing. That's a real nice experience. But somebody particularly early in their career sort of to see and go, oh, okay, actually what the company I'm working for is interesting. It's not just a print and mail company. It's not just a software company. There's something special here, if you like. And I think that's the bit that really drove home.
And I think just to add to the special bit, one of the things, and we're going to move on to the bit of one of the deal that I call the save the country. Tom hates that phrase, but I'm going to use it anyway for the moment. One of the things also I love about the Synertec business that you built up is that you've got an incredibly loyal team.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that have been with you for years is extraordinary, actually. Just talk a little bit about that and how the business fostered that culture of people being a family, because it felt like a family in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, as is the case with any business, it's varied a bit over the years and that sort of stuff. But in reality, the way I've always sort of joked is if somebody stays for 2 years, they tend not to leave. Especially in the old days, for going back sort of 5-6 years, Synertec was a weird place. It felt very different to pretty much any other business because it was very much a family environment. We've got people who've worked for us for 20 plus years, and the business is only 25 years old. So it gives you an idea. Some of these guys have been through every stage of the business growth. And in reality, it's because nobody ever becomes a number at Synertec. And I still try and make sure I know everybody by name. That is now.
Well, I've seen that. That's quite a scary thing with 300 people.
It's a lot more difficult than it used to be.
How good are you? How good are you with that? If somebody can you literally remember most people?
I just said if they've been there more than a year, I will definitely remember their name. Like that sort of thing, and I still there's little things that I do that I suspect are relatively rare, but across people like me, but I still want everybody's first day I send a personal email. So on my first day I send them a personal email, welcome them to the business and offer my help, and
regardless of their role in the business.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it's caused the odd scary moment for people over time, and when I've said, oh look, if there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know, and they've not had the induction training at that point, so they've got no idea who the person is who's emailing them. They've come back saying, oh, thank you very much, can you let me know what role you do? So I have had a couple of those, so I now time it slightly better, so it's towards the back end of the first day or on the second day, so that they don't do it. But yeah, I personally try and do that, and if I'm on the site, I'll actually join their induction session and go and say hello as well. I try and do that, try and actually say hello to them. And
as a leader, what makes that bit so key for you? Is it the fact that you just want them to realise that they matter?
Yeah, I think for me, there's two sides of it. The first side is, I want them to come in and I want them to enjoy the work. And I think that's important. If people enjoy the work, they tend to be more productive. They tend to enjoy their role. They tend to you'll get the best out of them. The second side of that is, if you build the people, you know who they are, you can get information as to what they need support with. And as a managing director, one of the weaknesses is sometimes you get too far away from what's going on the ground and don't know what's going on. And therefore you can actually miss things. So I still do question and answer sessions for every member of staff every 6 months. So everybody gets the opportunity to ask me questions directly. And they're great because it gives people the opportunity to feel like they're involved, engages staff, but it also means that I can, from the questions they ask, I can work out what people are worried about. And then that means I can start putting plans in place in the background. But in terms of, that's come up across 6 out of the 10 Q&A sections. I probably need to look at that and go, is there actually a problem here? And it gives me an extra information feed that you don't get from performance review notes or interviews or whatever it is. You tend not to get that sort of over communication from people who've been there a long time.
Yeah, it's so important as a leader. So look, I think it's great that you guys do it. Just talk a bit about the clients that obviously Synertec works for a number of large organizations. And we'll talk about some of the public sector stuff in a moment. But can you, in terms of winning those deals, can you remember your dad talking to you or your brother? Because obviously your brother was in sales. Can you talk to him how they went about winning some of those deals? And because it's quite, when you're a young company starting off, it's tough to get big contracts, right?
Yeah, I guess it changed over the years. And again, in the same ways our people have been with us a long time. So have some of our customers. So some of the customers actually predate me, in terms of, and we very rarely lose customers unless they've either got bust or they've gone and spent a lot of money on our IT system to replace. We do, so we very rarely lose customers. So in terms of what it used to be, it's varying massively over time because, years and years ago, we used to sell a folder inserter machine with our software package Prism, to get the best out of a folder inserter so people could get the best result in-house. So we'd sell that, and that was basically a capital purchase with a software piece attached, which is a bit of a no-brainer because it meant getting more out of the capital purchase and save money and all sorts of extra. So that was sort of the first original value sale, if you like, in terms of what we were doing. And then, I guess 2005, one of the customers turned around and said, I don't want to do this internally anymore. Your software package is capable of doing this. Is there any chance we can outsource it to doing to you? So, and as at the time, as all good business people do, you say yes, and then working out how to do it afterwards. And basically, that's great from there. That's sort of how that started. And then once we sort of built the value that we were providing to one or two customers, you sort of rinse and repeat that across what was the original hunting grounds, the wholesaler market. So we worked with a lot of builders, merchants, electrical wholesalers, all of those wine merchants, all sorts of stuff like that, deliberately. And because we knew that actually they've got problems with document design from old school ERP systems and that sort of stuff. And the thing with Prism is because it's so flexible, you can morph it to suit the problems of the time. And I guess that's what
You do, but I think that's the nature of it. As people know on this, the podcast, I talk about problems and desires all the time. And a good example of that is an organization that I introduced you guys to last year who are in the financial space, who have a problem around sending communications to people that are slightly elderly and can't view stuff as they used to in terms of communications, and are going, well, we don't know how to solve this. And it's like, well, okay, well, there's a solution because there's a company that can make that happen. And that goes back to the idea of fixing problems is what sales is all about.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's all how sales has always worked, is we go in and find out. I mean, if you name any other sort of top 30 biggest builders merchants, we work with the vast majority of them. And then we go in and speak to them and go, well, what's your problem? Have you outsourced this? What do you need doing? And then we build a solution that specifically fit their needs, basically, and go from there. So I guess that's always been the approach for us, is you have to go in and listen first. And then
talk.
Yeah. The benefit with Prism is because it's always been our own intellectual property. Back in the old days, somebody would go out and in fact, my father would go out right at the start, speak to a customer, find a problem, call the R&D director on the way home and say, look, I've got this problem, can you develop it? And the R&D director would develop it. And by the time my father went to work the next day, it had been developed and tested.
Right.
So like that sort of process was going on constantly. And now we're sort of 26 years in to building solutions for customers. It's now pretty rare you go to someone and they come up with a problem you've not seen before. Yeah. But even then, when we do, we still put it in the development queue and get it developed. So it's not, it's now still the same process going on.
And you cut on that because you customer focus, right? Yeah. So what I want to talk about is obviously you started working in the builders merchants. Talk to me how the business got involved in the NHS, because then we're going to lead on to the bit that the business part of things. So how did that happen? It's a difficult area to sell into, and not customers want to sell into the NHS.
So it was about 2009, I guess, where we started the first conversation with an NHS trust. And at the time, we only had one production facility in Wellington, Somerset. And as part of that, they came down. They were really interested. We could help them with some of the...
Was it a local trust in the Southwest, or was it? Can you remember?
I don't think it was. I actually can't remember who the customer is. There's somebody who could tell me. But yeah, they came down and we're looking at what our software could do, because their patient administration system didn't allow them to easily do it. And they were spending a lot of money post from the trust themselves. And they looked at us and go, oh, you could aggregate the volume and actually save us a lot of money, and all sorts of things like this, as part of that process. And it also came down to go, well, look, we're going to contract with you, but you need to put on a disaster recovery facility in the next few years. And that was where we sort of had to make a decision about whether we were really going hunting in the NHS or whether we were, happy doing what we were doing. And we took the decision at that point to open a second production facility at the time in Ratlet just outside St Albans. So that was the second one, and we then sort of scaled the production facility to cope with that. And from there, we basically rinsed and repeated that sale across the NHS. Don't get wrong, it made that sound incredibly easy to sell me to the NHS.
Well, I was thinking, I got like 75% of any, was it 70% of NHS trusts?
About 75, we work with about 75% of the NHS person. But I think the key stat in that is, to give you an idea of how tough it is to sell it to the NHS, we work with 75% of the organisations, but we've got about 35% of the volume. So even in existing customers, you can still double the size of Synertec. Just for existing customer. So it's an interesting piece to look at in that environment. But that is just because of the way the NHS works and the segregation in the way people work in there.
Yeah, and each different department works in different ways. But so look, we're going to come on to, to 2019, you become an investor in the business. But was it always obvious you were going to become the MD in that situation, or was there anyone else that was key for that role as well as you?
No, it wasn't obvious for me. certainly in that process. I mean, I don't know if I've told you this before, but the whole process of me becoming managing director was an interesting experience. So I was ops director, having bought into the business in 2019. And then on the 20th of May, 2020, the managing director at the time, so my father called a board meeting, didn't tell me what it was about, didn't tell anybody what it was about really. We all arrived and he announced in that meeting that he was retiring. Basically was going to take a step back from the business. So, which I'm thinking, it would have been nuts for him to mention that.
It's something like
that. So I'm like, that's for him to have mentioned that before I walked into this meeting. At which point the real curveball came was because they then nominated me to become the next managing director as part of that process. The comedy is, and I can't remember if this is actually true or whether this is just I've made it a story in my head now, but I'm fairly sure it is. It's basically, it went round a room of directors and basically I was the last one to vote, at which point they'd all said yes. And then it was pointless. Well, you were in a position to go, well, I don't actually know what happens if I say no now. I took that on from, 20th of May, 2020 was my first official day as managing director. But
And we're just going to imagine because COVID had just started at that point.
Yeah. So we'd sent everybody to work from home on this. So we were a week ahead of the lockdown. So we were like the 13th of March, I think we sent everybody home or something like that. Because we were lucky enough to send some communication on behalf of Public Health England in advance that gave me a bit of, as ops director, gave me a steer that I might want to get ahead of the game.
So that conversation, I didn't know actually from you. No. That was, so your dad didn't even tell you that he wanted you to know. It was literally, and it's quite interesting to go back to those 3 months when you were in the car with it, when he was being hard on you and whatever else. Yeah. It was like, now's your time, something.
Yeah, literally, yeah. So it was ultimately, like, if I look back over what had been 10 years of my career up until, 8 years of my career up until that point, I'd been effectively, the directors had always been working to try and push me to end up in a position where I was in the right role, the right place at the right time to do that, because they'd seen it early that there was probably the opportunity for me to be good at that role. And I remember that conversations relatively early on with the production director saying he was worried about the previous one, so Buckle Mudley. He didn't say he was worried that it wouldn't take very long for me to run out of stuff I could learn from him. So I think there was always sort of a plan in their heads ultimately that I was probably, I guess, the way out for them. It's the way to look at it, I guess, from a business person perspective. That none of them wanted to work forever, and they'd see me as a potential opportunity to facilitate that.
Before I go on to the stuff that's good, you must have, when you never saw your dad, you met at Sunday lunch or when you go around to your parents, you must have said, cheers, thanks for
I'm in the comments because it was COVID. We were in a lockdown. So it was quite a long time before I went round to see him. But yeah, it would have been one of those. The comedy is actually, because the family we've always worked together. Mum is definitely the boss of the family in there. That it was absolutely hard and fast rule that there is no work to be spoken in her house. It was completely not optional to have a conversation with her about it at that point. So yeah, and my mother is scary enough. You do not argue with her.
Yeah, well, I remember you telling me some of the stories about her grandparents or parents and whatever we'll do it. So was it your grandfather was the accountant to the Queen? Is that right?
Yeah,
that's quite a big thing, isn't it? To me, to be a accountant to the Queen, that's quite a scary role to have. But
I can imagine there's some big numbers knocking around in that process, and I don't want to get them wrong.
I can imagine. So look, we're in 2020. So you've just taken over as MD. COVID's now happening. Yeah. Talk to me about what that was like as a business owner. Because obviously, there was a lot of people that struggled within that whole process, that whole journey. There's a big learning curve for you. You've just become MD, and suddenly you've got a world phenomenal. And there's a great quote actually. Someone always tells me and I use this a lot. The guy from McKinsey once said when I was at an event, he said, "There's always a high probability of a low probability event occurring." Mm-hmm. And I guess for business owners, COVID was exactly that, wasn't it? It was like it was just. We'll talk about it for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it was equal parts absolutely terrifying to start with. I think my first job basically as managing director was I went through and worked out when we'd run out of cash. Was basically the first thing I did, and we got about 6 months. So from that, I then, going back to the employee focus, sort of looking after people, the first thing I sort of did in that process was I went out and communicated to all staff that actually they need to not be spending money frivolously. They need to make sure, because the business would protect it for as long as we could.
Yeah.
But there was no guarantee. And then I guess, it switched into, I guess there's that classic fight or flight response in the process, isn't there? I could either go down swinging or I could run away, basically. And I chose to go down swinging, basically. So I just went out and just made sure I was in front of and talking to as many different customers as possible, communicating with them about what was going on, what they might need to be considering in terms of communication, and basically offering free consultancy advice to basically anybody that needed help. And then in June 2020, so about a month, 6 weeks after I became managing director, one of those customers called me back and basically was just like, look, we're engaging with Public Health England and NHS England here. And we need some help about how you can communicate to the entire country, basically. Which sounds like an interesting sales deal, when it's one of those things you go, that's the challenge. I didn't expect to have to help consult. And so I spent a lot of time effectively just asking questions of them.
It's just good sales.
What have you thought about this? What have you considered? What you might need to do here? Is there any luck? And of course, to start with, they didn't tell me what it was. It was pretty obvious in terms of how that process works. And I've spoken to the health ministers at the time since then about what it looked like from the other side as well, which is an interesting take on it. But yeah, effectively, I did, like, at that point, I was thinking, okay, I've got the opportunity here to make to basically protect the business, and that
build and deal the state of the country.
Yeah, that's your phrasing, definitely. And at the time, it was definitely a case of, I can protect the business here, and I can make the business safe, definitely for this year, and then go from there. So that was really the focus of where I was going to provide a free consultancy.
And to get, to take a step, to make everyone aware on the podcast, because it comes through too humble to know to do that. But so Synertec were in time, we'll talk through this, so you were appointed by the government, UK government, to roll out the COVID vaccine across the whole of the UK.
Yeah. So we managed the communication part of that process. So it was via contact with the NHS England. We went through the process of, so for anybody who can't remember that time, or wishes not to remember that time, you've got the blue envelopes, the text messages, the emails. That was all. So obviously started 100% paper based, but we moved into more digital communication later on. But yeah, we managed that process for 3 years, I guess, 4 years, I guess.
But if I go back to sort of, I can't, and I'm, there's a lot of stuff around the COVID times that, people forget and whatever else, but I think it was towards the end of that year, if I remember rightly, that I could be wrong. You'll know the times goes better than I do, that Boris Johnson was like, and whatever people think of him, whatever, he was very pushy on the fact that the vaccine, when the vaccine was going to come out, he wanted to make that happen. Can you remember the whole sort of conversational sort of, obviously, with the ministers and stuff about the whole element of how it's going to come together? And you remember you telling a story of actually, how did you find out that you were going to do this?
So, I went through a tender process, which obviously I haven't consulted on it. There was some advantages during that process.
Which is all time to start.
So I haven't provided the advice. The tender was advantageous for Synertec, definitely, in terms of the way it was written. And we were originally successful on a national flu campaign, which is the first one, was because the original plan and strategy from the government was, instead of focusing on COVID because they haven't got a vaccine, let's get flu sorted and cut the legs off that, so that
was their original plan,
and so it doesn't add to the problem. Basically, right. We've got this massive problem. Let's not double down and get the flu really bad at the same time. So they went really hard for a national flu vaccine in that year,
right?
And then basically, so that was sort of October through to December, we were doing a national flu.
How many people was that? Just in terms of communications,
24 million.
24. It still wasn't popular. It was 24 million communications.
It was still a decent chunk, and it kept us busy as part of that process. And at that point, the business was safe. That was enough volume that it kept us safe in that area. But at the same time as we were doing that, we were still tendering for the COVID vaccine, because that was then looking like in
March.
February, March time was the vaccines were going to become available, and they needed to start inviting people from that time. And then we found out we won that in January. So we then had 4 weeks to boost to get into a position where we could facilitate the campaign. But yeah, in terms of the stories, I guess the whole campaign was a bit of an interesting experience, because a lot of the time we find out what we were going to do off the news, like everybody else did. I'm not even joking, it was mad. But yeah, it was an interesting experience as far as
we'll come to that in a minute. But just, do you remember the moment when you were told? Because obviously, I talk about a sales deal that saves a century. I mean, let's come back to the chase. We're talking about a deal that was worth multi tens of millions of pounds. Probably the biggest sales deal you'll ever do, I'm guessing. In the next was there. But even if you did do another one of the similar size, it's quite incredible. Can you remember how you felt where you were when you were told that it was going to be you?
I can remember where I was for both the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine tender awards. For the flu vaccine, I was stood. It was August time, and they'd allowed everybody out for like still isolating small groups, and it was August time in 2020, and I was stood on a pontoon in Tuckenhay on the River Dart, where I'd gone for 2 weeks on holiday just in the summer down there. In fact, my dog had just jumped into a puddle of mud, and I was carrying him around whilst on the phone, dealing with NHS England. So I took that call there and found out about that, and then the COVID vaccine found out in January time, and I was sat in my front room of my house, and got a very nice upholstered Gloucester rugby chair, because sadly I'm a Gloucester rugby fan. And I was sat in that as the email landed in my inbox, letting me know about that. In terms of how I felt, I guess that's probably one of my biggest weaknesses, is I almost never celebrate anything particularly well.
I play golf with you. Driving. Oh well, I'm like, what?
Yeah, so it's I guess I was really happy for the business in that situation, but I think the fact I immediately went from managing director of sales in that environment to back in the ops director shoes of going, oh crap, how am I going to deliver this? Sort of part of that process. So yeah, I don't think I ever really stopped and celebrated that success.
And it's difficult because, maybe when you're a bit older, you'll look back and think, actually, this is what happened. But I do call it the sales deal at the same country, because, the reality is back then for the UK, there was a huge amount of furlough was being costing the country billions. We're going to live with the cost of COVID for a long time to come in people's and in financial circumstances. And, and the only way at the time, I'm trying to remember back to that point, the only way at the time was to try and get people back out and to get people healthy again.
Yeah.
So the fact that you were given this job to communicate to 69 million people or whatever it is, it's quite an incredible thing. And to go through that whole process, and look, maybe there's a separate podcast we'll do around that whole journey, how it happened. But did that weigh on you guys? Did you feel a little bit like a sense of responsibility?
I could say that. So, certainly there was me and one project manager who works directly for me at the time, who basically carried the brunt of making it happen. And it was single-handedly the best experience and the worst experience of my life in reality, because it's stressful enough being a managing director as it is.
It's really
the people I with 300 people without having to suddenly go, oh crap, if I don't get this right, potentially we extend everybody else being in lockdown by months.
It was nearly your fault, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things. So we were really focused on the outcome and making sure that basically whatever we got thrown at us, we do it with minimum fuss and get it done. I mean, we were really lucky, to be honest, because as ops director, obviously it wasn't that long before the Brexit, and the official end date was the year before. And I built a lot of paper stocks because I wasn't sure as part of that process, I wasn't sure what that looked like in terms of bringing paper into the UK with the borders changing. And I didn't want to run out of paper for existing clients.
Yeah.
Which then obviously, because work dropped off over part of the year, I then got a huge stockpile, which then meant
what do I do with this?
The COVID vaccination campaign started, I'd got more paper than pretty much anybody else in the country, which was one of the real things meant we could get going really quickly. But that was almost accidental as part of the process. But yeah, for me, it's added project management to run it. It was it was very, very pressurized. And she certainly put in a huge amount of hours in that process to make that happen.
Were you getting pressure from central government to basically, how did that, I'm not saying the internet, was it a case of they were like, can you get more out? Can you get more out? How did all that sort of, that go into the ins and outs of it?
It was basically like everything was last minute. So
you might be saying like Boris and accent, and you were like, oh, really?
Yeah, like I can't remember, there was a day saying, we will start sending vaccination letters tomorrow. And I'm sat listening to the news going, right, okay. Like, okay, that's an interesting game. How am I going to do that sort of thing? And like, then you get a phone call the next morning from people who've got, well, the Prime Minister wants us to start sending letters today. What do you need to get the letters out the door? And it's like, well, some data first would be great.
Where do
you want me to send the letters? Sort of thing. And I guess that was symptomatic of the campaign. It was because everybody was on the balls of their feet, effectively. And
everyone would do fairness to the government. They didn't know. They were juggling stuff. It was live at the time.
No, exactly. It was like one of those classics of there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. But yeah, we had all sorts of little variations and that sort of stuff and curveballs. And then you get into like the politics side of things and that sort of stuff where, like, I think Royal Mail got involved at one point and we went from having white envelopes, blue envelopes, because they wanted to be able to sort it easier and that sort of stuff, which sounds like a simple change until you realize that it made the envelopes the slipperiest things in the world to count and turned some of my operators' hands blue in the process. So it's one of those things that like people still talk about like this. You can pick up a batch of envelopes or about this big and it'd be relatively easy to hold. With those, the middle ones would drop out because they were so slippery. So it just, like little things like that just added complexity to the whole campaign. It was constantly dealing with all that sort of variation and process that they've gone through. And
I want to ask this question because we can talk for a little bit of can't, and you've got a lot of busy day-to-day, but commercially negotiating with the government at that point, how did it feel? Because obviously the deal was worth, tens of millions of pounds in terms of, but there must have been part of you that was like, I don't want to be in lockdown anymore, I want to get this fixed. But also there's part of you going, well, I've got to maximize the value for the business. How did you make that work?
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? I mean, completely mental. I've always had a policy, I will not profit like over the top off other people's misfortune. And that plays into some of the products we've got with accessible information and all sorts of stuff like that is I probably don't charge what that service is worth because I want to profit off people not being able to read because they're blind or something along those lines. Yeah. And I took the same process with COVID. So I went as cheap as I could without risking the business in terms of not knowing what the variation was looking like, that sort of stuff. So we made a good market, but it was not
ridiculous. Not like some of the people that made.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, you could probably charge 20-30% margin on something like that, net margin, and we were nowhere near that. And I mean, in some ways, over the years, as it got eroded by becoming more business as usual, we've ended up at a much lower margin doing it now than we're doing it there. You look back and go, well, I'm almost getting punished because I was honest up front. But I think it was the right thing to do at the time. So yeah, we didn't go as high as we could have done on the price. I don't think in that process we deliberately went in for let's make this an easy decision for everybody and just get this rolling.
I think that's incredible credit to you and Synertec. But we've seen in the last couple of months, there's a lot of people in that sector that profited significantly from that situation. So I think it's huge credit to you guys that you said, look, we're gonna cover what we need to do to cover our costs and to manage the business, but to then be in a position where we're not gonna, we want to get the country back to work, I guess, and see it, and just as we conscious of time today, but seeing it as it all came through and starting to see when the country was coming back to life a little bit, because wasn't it? Vaccines came out, people started to come out, that must have felt just quite like for you guys, like, wow, we've made this happen. Not make it because the vaccine obviously did, but you must have felt incredibly proud to be part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bit like the pride for me comes out from, I think I've seen some bits about it's described as one of the most successful communication campaigns in the history of mankind and that sort of stuff. And to have been involved in that, and don't get me wrong, our part of it is relatively small. Obviously the data and all that sort of stuff is a huge chunk of that campaign. And when we just facilitated the physical communication to the right people, but it's a
pretty big job.
Yeah, it's
don't sell my sales deal, save the country.
It was that process of proud about what we achieved in that area, I don't think again, at the time, I don't think we ever really stopped, because even after that first vaccine rollout, obviously we knew very early on that we'd need a second booster jab. So by the time we were finishing the first invite, we already knew that we were going to end up doing more invites.
Right.
And that sort of, I mean, that culminated in the peak volume. I think we did 21 million invites in a month. Which was obviously 1 million a day plus business as usual volumes we were doing. So,
I was just thinking, you didn't stop the current existing customers out in the meantime.
No, I was completely clear as part of the process that we were not to impact existing customers. It was not their fault that we were in that situation and that we'd won that piece of business. So we had to maintain the quality of both as part of the process.
Amazing. So, I mean, there's loads of stuff we can talk through as a result. I'm conscious of time today, but to me, I think it's, incredible. I always say to people, when I talk to people, they will have come across Synertec in some way, because they will have had a blue letter coming through the door, or they'll have had a communication. So, I think it's incredible. I think there's a lot of people that worked incredibly hard at that time. But did you ever get I was going to ask you this final sort of question on this, but did you ever get a thanks from anyone in government because government is a bit sort of, sometimes they sort of like pay the money, but did they ever actually thank you for what you did, or how you did it and how quickly you did it?
Never officially at the time. We were invited to join, and so during that process became the 75th anniversary of the NHS.
Right.
And we were invited to be in a book that commemorates the history of the NHS. So I always took that as the thanks of, I think we're one of the only companies to appear in that book.
Right. Okay.
And if you look at that as part of the process home, that's a real nice to have. And we've still got a copy of that at every single one of our sites and that sort of stuff. So I've always looked at that. I've since spoken to the health minister at the time about the whole piece. And he was pretty like, oh, thank you for that. Like in that environment, that we were talking well after the fact. That's this year. Then I've had that conversation. So it was never a thanks at the time. And to be honest, I never really expected one. I just saw it as doing our job. And I know that sounds a bit twee, but in reality, I never saw it as special.
And I've controlled, but actually, all right, some people might say, oh, we could have done it. But actually, the speed and the accuracy and the way in which you did what you did, and to be able to get people, and all right, there was, like you say, the whole operation was a British success story, I think, to be able to, but for you guys to be the people that were actually making sure that people knew where to be and how, I remember when I got my letter, I went and had my vaccine at Taunton Racecourse, right? Mm-hmm. It come from you guys. And I think that's incredible, the fact that, you made that happen. It must leave a sense of pride.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think I don't think it could be underestimated that, the easy choice would have been for the government NHS England to choose somebody else to do that. We were a relatively small Somerset-based business, not a massive sort of PLC or anything like that. And actually it would have been a lot easier to choose that.
Yeah.
But they obviously felt we were the right people for that job because of the variation and the flexibility that we were able to offer.
Amazing. So first the time there, and I've taken out a lot more. I'm probably going to do a second podcast interview with Tom in time to talk about other stuff, but just obviously now the business has grown. You recently were acquired as a business, which I guess has left you as an MD going, wow, it's another stage in the journey process. How? Yeah. Look, how? You're still young, right? Because I always get this, you're annoyingly young. You hit the bloody golf ball a mile and you're annoyingly 33, 34, is that?
35 now.
35, there you go, a bit older. But, so what's your goals? Because obviously the business has been acquired, which is great. Yeah, you personally in the business, but what I've known about you is you're always hungry for more. You don't stop. Your drive to carry on is just like a bit unwavering, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's weird, isn't it? I suspect there's a lot of managing directors who sell a business and almost take the foot off the gas a little bit. Yeah. I was reflecting on it the other day. I reckon I've been working harder now than I've ever worked.
Yeah.
Just because actually I want to prove that actually I can carry on and I can operate in a different environment.
Yeah.
Being before by a company has been a great experience. For me, I've enjoyed learning, and they've got a lot of experienced people in their business. One of them just released a book actually in example of building businesses and that sort of stuff, which is a great read. And it's one of those things that I'm enjoying learning from that experience at the moment, whilst also got the opportunity to drive Synertec for at least the next 3 or 4 years, with the support of a bigger entity and a better financial backing than we've probably ever had. Not we were weak financially, but more of a, it's much easier when you're a PLC to build strength in terms of that side.
Also, I remember from the conversation when I was doing some work with you guys that, the opportunity in terms of being able to work with the, Restore, who have taken over the business, the customer base. There's so many elements where there's so many perfect interlaps in terms of size of company, types of companies. It's like, wow, there's a great opportunity to upsell and mix between the two. And
they've got an unbelievably strong customer base in terms of who they've got in there, which very conservative. The business could grow massively towards that. And that's a really exciting challenge for both me and them in terms of they see the value in terms of what they can bring to us, as well as potentially me being my normal blunt self and providing a bit of questioning to them as well as part of the process from a different perspective.
Amazing. Well, I'm conscious we've taken up a lot of time, and there's a couple of things you've got to do today. So before we finish, obviously, there's one final thing, one final question I'd like and how people can reach you, but that motivation, you've always come across to me as someone incredibly driven. And what is that? What's that camel of birds inside you to be that driven? What is that thing? Because I've played golf with you, and you're bloody driven to beat me on a golf course. Even now and again you do, but
it's very funny.
But what is that drive? What's that? Can you see entrepreneurs and business owners and people listening to this? What's the thing that makes? Because I always think people say to me, "Oh, if I had their resource," you've got that, but you're still so driven. What makes that so key for you? Do you think? Is there anything inside you can pick on?
I genuinely, do you know what? I've been asked this quite a few times over the years. I don't know what it is that drives me. And my wife asks me constantly in terms of the process of obviously following the acquisition of why are you doing it? Sort of why are you driving yourself this hard? That sort of thing. And I think I've always had a sort of self-doubt and sort of a lack of confidence in my own ability. And I think partially it's because I'm constantly trying to prove that I am capable of doing what I'm doing. I've never been overconfident in terms of my abilities and capability and that sort of stuff. So I've always been a case of, always trying to prove that to myself, not really to anybody else. It's not.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned the competitiveness in golf, but that's just because I think that's how it comes out of, I know I can do this.
When I see golf, you get frustrated because you frustrated yourself. Right?
Yeah. I if somebody's a better golfer than me, then I don't mind. It is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. But and I think that's it. I think the drive comes from wanting to prove to myself that I am as capable as at least some people suggest that I might be.
Well, it's a very humble way to end the podcast. And I think it's an incredible thing that you said there, because as the MD of a business that owns 300 people, employs 300 people and, does millions of pounds of revenue, and has, been involved in doing a deal that saved the country, as I would call it. I think it's incredibly humble that you're saying that. And I think, I don't smoke at your backside, but you're a very good leader. You're good at what you do. You understand the business elements and you work incredibly hard to make it happen. And I don't think business is overly more complicated than that. If you focus on the customers, like you've always said, about what we can do to solve problems and to do things. And that's what I call the nub of sales. It's focus on being a problem solver, right? If you solve problems, the rest can, POs follow pen. So the reality is, it's how do you make sure that you can keep solving them and things become easier? But how can people reach you? Because obviously the podcast can go out and share it, but can people, LinkedIn's normally where you're at, I guess, a lot of times. Is that where the best place for people to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is one way, or the website's got a ability to get a hold of them. If you address it to me, they're pretty good at getting it across to me at some point in that process, especially the sales team know if somebody's asked me directly how to get in contact. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way for most people to get on.
Yeah, and we'll put a link to Tom's profile on there. He's a great connector, shares lots of insights and stories around what he's doing as an MD as well. So, look, mate, thank you very much for coming in and giving me your time today. It's been an absolute privilege for me to hear the story. So many stuff I didn't even know, and I've worked with you for a little while, and some incredible stories in there. So, thank you for giving it your time. Thank you for doing what you did with it. All that hard work that you guys and the team did with COVID. I think people forget about it a little bit now. I'm hoping that they're going to maybe involve you in some of the COVID inquiry stuff, actually, because I think it'd be great to hear what the background stuff that went on, to make that happen. But great to have you on the podcast, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Well, there you go. That was Tom Baldock, the managing director of Synertec. Then I'm going to call it a deal that saved a country. He's probably going to kill me if I keep putting that out there. But the fact that they were responsible for communicating the COVID vaccine to the UK audience and sending communications to 70 million people. Wow. Incredible achievement. But hope you enjoyed the podcast this week. If you have, please reach out to me and share it with me or put you in contact with Tom. We're welcome if you do enjoy the podcast, share it with others. Let's review it. That always helps us to make sure we get more guests on board like Tom that can share some incredible stories. But that's it for this week. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you all soon. Take care.